Welcome to video 3. At this point I can't say anything as to whether there'll be any fry because you don't know whether there are going to be any born or not. But when I set out to do this, I set out for about 200 to 300 with this batch because it makes it easier for the video, and if things crash I don't have to start all over again. But using this method I've bred up to 1,500. When you do that, you're dealing with, the water quality becomes a lot touchier because you have a much higher bioload in the aquarium, and it can be done. So you run into people sometimes and they'll say, oh yeah, I've bred that fish. When you talk to them about this or some of the other fish, oh, I've bred that fish. And then I say, well, have you raised up the fry? Well, no, they haven't bred the fry, but they've bred the fish. Well, most fish will breed. Where the challenge comes is in raising the fry. Now you might find when you're doing this that you'll have to do it a couple of times to get it dialed in, which is fine. You really do have to feed them 3 times a day. If you miss a feeding, you can lose up to a third to a half the batch. They're just too small to go more than 8 to 12 hours without eating. So that's just something to keep in mind. Good luck. If you got any questions, please email me at selectaquatics@gmail.com, and you'll find that all the effort will be worth it. Thank you. Okay, it's the next morning now. We're about to take the divider out today, and there are fry everywhere. I don't know how much the camera can show up, but there are, and it's funny, I mean, this is how tiny they are, but there's a couple hundred, quite a few hundred. So there'll be a die-off at this point for the first few days as they get adjusted. See any there? They're really, really tiny. They're darting about. Anyway, so with this batch, this is when we're first seeing the fry. So now you know that about when you should start seeing them. Sometimes I don't see them for another day or two, but this looks like it's going to be a healthy batch. Okay, we're now into the 3rd day after the adults have been removed, and today is the day we remove the divider and remove some of these plants. Now our goal is to get this water as clean as possible and keep it as clean as possible, but without removing any fry and possibly any eggs that are still left. There shouldn't be any eggs left at this point. You still can't see anything. I imagine a lot of the breeding happened toward the back, and so that might be where most of the fry are. I'm not concerned. We'll just keep going here a day at a time. But the first thing we're going to do, since we're pretty sure that there's no longer any eggs on the plants, is remove the Java fern. Now what I've done in the past is I've saved, like I would take the Java fern and put them in the 5-gallon buckets and then save those buckets if any young hatched out of them. And you might want to do that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and take these ferns out and then put them into other tanks. And then we're going to lift and remove the divider. We don't want to leave all the Java fern in there as well as all the Java moss, because then you're just simply accumulating too much organic mulm and such. The amount of Java moss underneath the divider should be enough to keep the water quality up for the amount of water that we've got, and also should be open enough that we should be able to, through water changes, remove a lot of the debris from the water without removing any of the young. So we'll do that here in a moment. Okay, I've just removed the divider, took the plants out, and also because the air stones were turned up really high before, because the plants provided all that obstruction underneath the divider, I had them going really strong, so I turned down the air stones to about 50% of what they were doing before. There's the other one, there it is. So that we still have current going throughout the tank, but the young don't have to worry about fighting currents when they're sitting in these plants and feeding and such. So I'm going to do another water change now. I did feed once already today. It's currently about noon. I'll be feeding again in about 3 hours. But from stirring everything up and disrupting everything and releasing all this more organic stuff into the water, and we don't need the infusoria anymore. They're getting the vinegar eels 3 times a day. I'll go ahead and do another water change and then feed again about 3, then do a water change after that, and then feed again tonight. And hopefully within a day or so of now is historically about when I would be able to start seeing fry swimming around in here. So we'll see. Now sometimes what I'll do, this is the day after the divider was taken out, is I'll drain the water down to where we're just a couple inches low, and then feed when the water level is really low. Here are the, you can see all the young coming out. The vinegar eels were just put in. And then I'll go ahead then and then bring the water level up after the feeding to the top over the top of the sponge filter that was just put in this morning. So far they appear to be doing well. Now the next feeding will be about, I've been feeding about 10 o'clock at night. I'm fine with the late feeding going as late as possible because they've got to go till, you know, like 9-ish the next morning before they're going to get fed again. And there's no other gap as large as that. So I'm fine with feeding 10, 11 o'clock if it comes down to that. The lights are left on 24/7 for the fry. So there's no issue of excess deterioration of the food in the water. And of course every feeding is followed by a good 50% water change. So alright, they're doing good. We'll check back on them again in about another 6-7 hours. Okay, this is the morning after the sponge filter was put in. And you can see how much clearer the water is, how much nicer the water is. Using a sponge filter is really helped a lot with keeping water quality consistent during this first month of life, and then they'll be split up into their own tanks at about 4 weeks. As many of you know, I don't advocate using sponge filters at all for fish otherwise in the fish room, because, you know, most of us don't clean them. They don't really pull the mulm off the bottom. Their mechanical filtration is negligible. But with fry like this, they're essential, and so I use them all the time. Can't really see much going on here now because we're down in the plants, but I'm about to give them a feeding of vinegar eels. We'll cloud the water up a little bit and then do a water change. So I just put the vinegar eels in, and we can see the young starting to rise up out of the plants to eat. So we are now at 2 days after the divider was removed. Okay, here we are now on day 5 after the divider was taken out. And at this point you look at them and try to decide whether or not you need to start making the transition over to brine shrimp. My temperature here is 78 degrees. So for instance, if you're at 76, then you might take you a day longer or 2 days longer. If you're at 78, it might take you a day earlier to decide to go over to brine shrimp. As I look through here and see the size of these, and I bred these figuring there would be 300 to 500, and we're certainly in that ballpark. And based on the size I see here now, I'm probably going to give them another day or so. They were just fed some vinegar eels. I brought the water level down. I've been bringing the water level down for them to eat, and then I bring it back up again, gradually increasing the depth. So right now on the depth gauge, we've been staying here or sometimes about here. This distance here is, I believe it's 3 inches. We want to be here by the beginning of week 1, which is about where we are. And then by week 2, we're going to head to about here. And we'll be into 2 weeks about here. So we'll slowly start moving up. Currently, like I say, I'm right here now, and I'll probably come up maybe a quarter of an inch. So it's like every other day or so I go up about a quarter of an inch. But then I've been bringing the water level down to feed them, and the reason is because the food then is denser, the water level is not as deep, and I'm removing entirely dirty water as opposed to being a mix of the water that I've added in and the water I take out. When I first started out, I was filling it up really high and then draining it down to where I wanted it. And in part that was so that I didn't suck out any eggs or really tiny fries that are first hatching. Now that they're getting a little bit larger, I don't have to worry so much about, there's usually a bunch over here. I don't have to worry so much about the getting sucked into the net any longer. You know, the net breeder when I'm doing the water changes. The best way to do this is, you know, to watch this whole video and then get a feel for what it is I'm trying to do at various points. Keep the water clean, feed them 3 times a day, and then watch them for when they're ready for various things. And then go back and then start it off. I mean, what temperature you're at, the quality of your water is going to differ, and it's going to change, you know, as opposed to watching this and saying, okay, at day 2 we did this, at day 4 we did this. That may work for you, but in time you'll find that every batch is different, depending on the number of pairs you started off with, the age of the fish you started off with, what your temperature is, quality of your water, all those variables. And so each batch is actually a little different. Yeah, there's a couple of shrimp in there. Those are probably like little tiny babies when this process first started, but from eating eggs and stuff, they grew pretty quickly. But anyway, when you get a feel of what's going on, then go ahead and start the process, and then implement the steps as you go, and you'll get better at it with each batch. We're on day 6 now after the divider was taken out. The young now are swimming out more in the open water when they're being fed. The water level is still lowered right now because I just fed the vinegar eels. I'm still going to wait, I think, at least 1 more day before I start feeding brine shrimp. There's some that are getting bigger, but you've also got to weigh the fouling of the water that the brine shrimp adds. And the water level is still pretty low right now. But I'll start adding brine shrimp tomorrow, a little bit at a time, to the vinegar eels. And then carefully watch the cloudiness of the water as it develops between feedings. And if it gets too cloudy, then I'll up the amount of water changes and maybe slow down the pace of the introduction of brine shrimp. And I'll feed a mix of vinegar eels and brine shrimp for about 3-4 days before I go all over to brine shrimp. And then the vinegar eels are done for this batch. So now the problem you've got is that the water is now too deep to put the net breeder in to go ahead and siphon the water out. So I built these things. These are like 2-inch by 6-inch kind of tiles I picked up at, you know, Home Depot, tied up with electrical ties. And then I start piling them up on one side of the tank. And you gotta lower them in real carefully, of course, so you don't crack the bottom of the tank. And then I can set the the net breeder on top of that, like this. And now the water level, as you can see, is below the top of the net breeder. And then I'll just go ahead and siphon the tank down to that bottom red line again and get ready for this evening's feeding. And then lastly, on day 7, I removed a bunch of the plants because they were beginning to just collect debris. And when I'm adding extra organic material to the water, I want to make sure to get as much out of the water as I can. I don't think that removing the amount of plants I did will affect the plants' ability to keep the water filtered, because the water changes are so extreme and so frequent that they probably don't get much done. The sponge filter doesn't remove any of the particulate matter at all and really doesn't do much for the filtration, but it just keeps my ammonia and nitrate levels in check. But otherwise, the debris continues to collect on the bottom, and over time that has to be kept ahead of. So ironically, you can look in here and you don't see any fish at all, but they're all in the plants, and they're all hiding from the water change. And so now we move on. Okay, here we are at day 9, and got a second sponge filter put in. If I was to do this over again, I would probably put the sponge filters, the 2 of them in earlier, but the water hasn't been a problem this cycle, so I just went ahead and put it on in. But we had a little bit of disruption last couple days. I had to replace the stand that this tank sits on. So these guys had a little bit of a transport from the old stand onto the new stand. But they seem to have weathered it pretty good. But as you can see, there's not many to be seen. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few vinegar eels in, and you can see them come up out of the plants. So I just poured some vinegar eels and brine shrimp in here. Gradually start to come out of the plants, but they stay hidden down in the plants. They're still not ready to come out yet. As they come along here, we're about 3-4 days after the last video. I guess we're about 11 days out from when the divider was removed. And the water level gradually comes up. We're up to here now on the water level. So we're still not to the end of the second week. So the second week isn't going to happen until about up here for another 2 or 3 days. So since the water level is getting higher, I needed to add another layer of the tiles to the bottom. And so that now the net breeder, when it's laid in here to siphon the water out, does not suck any fry in. So this will continue to go up as the water level goes up, so that the net breeder always clears the surface of the water above when I'm draining the water for the water changes. Still getting fed 3 times a day, still have 50% water change after each feeding. Right now they're probably getting 2/3 brine shrimp and 1/3 vinegar eels. I'm expecting I can go to all brine shrimp either today or tomorrow. At this size now, we're about, I don't know, about the 12th day in, I think. These are probably big enough now to go over just to brine shrimp. So I think today will be the last day of vinegar eels for them.
They've been on, this will be the 5th day that they've had a mix of vinegar eels and brine shrimp. And I'll gradually start bringing up the water level, maybe a little more quickly than I've been doing it, as they start to put on some size. At this time, about 12 days after the divider's been removed, you can just now start to see the black spotting that's coming up. There's a little dot near the tail and a little dot near the head. And that will be their primary coloration until the males start to develop the red stripe. Been having a little bit of foam collecting at the water line between feedings, so I know now that the water changes are not entirely keeping ahead of the buildup of organics in the water. So I removed about half the plants because a number of the fish are still really they really depend on the plants and they hide in them, so I won't remove them. But by bringing it down by about half, I remove something that was really holding on to a lot of the organic waste. So the water here is a little cloudy at the moment because I just pulled the plants out. But this should help my water clear up and should help the water quality. And they're getting big enough now that they shouldn't need the plants for infusoria, certainly, as they did when they were younger. We are on day 18. Another slab of tiles was added, and so that the breeder can come up a little further and the water level can come up a little further. We're up to here right now, so I'm above the 2-week line. They're doing real well. Their bellies are full of newly hatched frozen baby brine shrimp. And they'll be ready probably to catch the net within about 2 weeks. Okay, we are now at about 23 days or so after the divider was taken out. They're continuing to do well. We now have the water level up to, this is generally where I try to get to by the 3-week point. And then that's how much farther we have to go to get to the top of the tank. There's no hurry to get the water level up as fast as possible once the amount of water in the tank maintains a good water quality for the fish. It's more comfortable for them to keep the water quality down. I'm sorry, to keep the water level down and then keeping the water quality up. Now there's an interesting thing that happens with this fish, and I'm sure it happens with all egg layers that lay in a lot, like a lot of eggs at a time. I've had batches where I've missed a feeding or something's happened and I lose a bunch of fish, a bunch of the batch, and I get freaked out and I think, well, okay, I can destroy the batch and start from scratch, or I can raise up what's left. So I usually decide to raise up what's left and clean it up and all of that. And then I'll notice within a day or two that there'll be a lot of tiny little fry that couldn't possibly be new fry because the eggs were laid, a week or two ago. And if you look closely in this tank, you'll see that there's some young in here that are very much smaller than the rest, which leads me to believe that there are times when there are eggs that will sit and not hatch, and if conditions are good, they'll hatch a week or even longer after they're laid. I don't know this for a fact, but I have seen a tremendous bounce back on my numbers if if I just go ahead and I you know, start feeding more vinegar eels again for the smaller fish. So what I'll do when my numbers are a little low with the batch is I'll continue to feed vinegar eels occasionally for the smallest fish, like once or twice a day as opposed to all 3 times a day. And they'll come in. But you can see here that there are some that are very large and some are very small, and I can't attribute all of that just to various growth rates. And this is my my co-patriot. This is Ripley, who is contributing dialogue occasionally. So, not particularly interested in the video, but just so you know who's making all the noise. Now, for example, there is a fry right in that dark spot between the 2 bunches of tiles. He's just coming out here, and he is probably a quarter or a fifth the size of the biggest fish in the tank. So I tend not to believe that it's a 3-week-old fish. So how did that fish come about? So good conditions and good feeding throughout the entire month, I think, are what's going to bring you your maximum yield. There's another small one right there. You can see how different in size they are. So I mentioned that the females, when you put them together, are supposed to produce about 150 to 300 eggs, according to the books, which is understandable. And about 50 to 60% of those will be fertile. So when you put them together, we had 4 females or 6 females put together originally, leaving it, and only 4 dropped their spawns, and they were young fish, which means they're going to be closer to the 150 figure. So that's 600. You figure half of that got fertilized, that's 300. And then during the grow out period and such, you're going to lose a few. And so we end up here with a tank, particularly when I moved the rack and they had a day of differing conditions. We end up now with about 200. So that's probably about right. So we're now about 6-7 days from splitting them up into their own tanks. Water quality is not as much an issue as long as you're doing the water changes after each feeding. Our water level now is up to there. So we've got a little while to go, but we can start bringing the water level up a little quicker now because the issues of air bladder issues are not as much an issue anymore. The thing about water quality now is that when you first started off, the whole thing was when you're putting food into the water, the uneaten food was causing the water to get cloudy and causing your bacterial blooms. And so you were always at this balance between what the fish could eat, making sure the fish had food they could get to easily, and then putting enough food into the tank so that occurred, but at the same time trying to ensure that you didn't cause more water quality problems by putting in too much food. Now the food is getting eaten and the water quality issues come about simply because you have a lot of waste produced by a lot of very quickly growing fish. So the water quality now is a little different. You don't really get bacterial blooms so much, as the water will just take on a yellowish quality if you don't change it. I'm still doing, even though this tank is filled as deep as it is, I'm still doing about 50% 3 times a day. And I find that when I'm getting ready to do a water change before a next feeding, that you can see the water getting a little bit yellower, a little bit grungier looking, and that the water change that you're doing is definitely necessary. I imagine that wouldn't be the case if you didn't feed them. They're at a point now where they could probably go a day without being fed, or 2 days, I imagine. They no longer, will die off on you if you don't make all 3 feedings. But you still got to keep on top of water quality. And I'll try to put them in 30-gallon tanks, where at this size I don't have more than 100 in a tank. and then at some point they'll need to be thinned down when they grow about twice this size. Of the many times that I've bred these guys, when compared to live bearers, they've been really consistent. I've bred many thousands of them, and I have yet to see an albino. I really haven't seen any leucistic individuals. They've all been pretty consistent. There'll be males where the red stripe isn't as deep or as bright. There's variation, of course, in the amount of black, and right now I'm kind of pushing for more green in the top of the body. But as a rule, they breed quite consistently. I have had pictures sent to me by a breeder in Australia that had pictures he had gotten from Germany of mutations of these guys, and the mutations are usually pretty mild. There'll be a black spotting on the sides, or there will be, blotchiness kind of a thing. The red stripe might only be half the body length, but I didn't see any of the mutations that looked to be something positive that would want to develop out. A while back, I had a friend in Hawaii send me some really nice veil-tail rosy barbs, and he wondered if we would be able to cross them. So I tried on 3 separate occasions, swapping the females with the males and such, as to which species I used for each. And they would breed normally, they would spawn, but then none of the eggs would hatch. And after the 3rd attempt with the same result, I figured they couldn't cross. So at this point, it's just a case of when I breed these guys out, I keep an eye out for the absolute best fish, and then when it comes time to choose breeders, I usually have a group going of the best fish that have been represented in the room over the past batch or two. Okay, here they are at about a month old, a month and a couple of days. Water levels made it up to there, near the top, but they're certainly able to be taken out and put in any size tank at this point. They're still a little small to not be picked on by other fish. And so we're going to go ahead and tear this tank down and count them and see how many we've got. Okay, this is those batch of fry. They're divided up. Each one of these has 25 in it. So there ended up being 311 in that batch. So they're all here just beginning to be shippable sized, but they're still pretty small. So 311 is what we ended up with. This is one half of that group about 2 weeks later. There were 161 in this tank, and none have died. You can see they're put on some size pretty quickly. Right now they're getting fed twice a day, brine shrimp once a day, and then a dry food once a day. And they're coming along nicely. Now we'll take a look at the second half. Where that last group was in a 40 tall, this group's in a 30 homemade kind of a thing. 150 were put in here, none have died. But I have shipped about, let's see, at this point I've shipped about 35 of them out. So there's, about 115 or so here. But they're slowly coming out of the plants to feed a little flake food I put in there. But they're well on their way, and as you can follow on the website to see how their growth goes, the males will start to develop their stripe at about 6 months. And they'll be fully colored up at about 8 months. So thank you for watching all the way through this and seeing how we raise Odessa Barbs here. I'm going to turn around actually and get a new batch started. And we'll see how They do, and these guys are available. Just email me at selectaquatics@gmail.com, and I can send a group of 6 of them out to you. And I generally will send 8. So thank you very much.